Hi everyone, today we're diving into a true slice of suburban absurdity. A story about curtains power and the wild places unchecked authority can lead when no one dares to push back. But trust me this time, someone did. And the result? Let's just say, it wasn't what the queen of the HOA was expecting. Picture this, a pastel-suited woman stands in the middle of a manicured lawn, screaming into a phone about curtain rods, barricades, and threats to her personal safety. Emergency services on the way, helicopters circling, sirens wailing through the peaceful cul-de-sac, and the supposed threat a mild-mannered illustrator sipping lukewarm coffee behind a set of lavender tulip curtains. Oh yeah, this happened. And it could happen to anyone, even you. So before we get into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy the stories we tell here on US Justice Story. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where and when you're tuning in. Now, let's go back to where it all began. It was a Tuesday. That sort of Tuesday where the world just feels quiet, cooperative. Ethan Rowe, 45, sat at his kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and a notepad full of doodles he'd likely turn into a children's book spread. Outside his front window, the tulips in his small garden nodded gently in the wind. Inside, the matching tulip print lavender curtains he'd hung 2 years ago framed the morning light like watercolor drapery. Peaceful, simple. But in Briar Blossom Lane, peace never lasted long, especially not under the watchful eye of Margaret Fenwick. Margaret was the president of the Homeowners Association and something of a legend around the cul-de-sac. At 61, she carried herself like a retired military general with a taste for seasonal flair. Her short silver hair curled in a stiff helmet that never moved in the wind. Her lipstick was always coral, her wardrobe exclusively pastel pantsuits with name-embroidered HOA lanyards. She didn't just enforce rules, she invented them. And today she was targeting Ethan's living room. At exactly 9:07 a.m., the doorbell rang. Ethan flinched. He wasn't expecting anyone. The kind of dread that only HOA residents know crept into his spine. He peered through the peephole and sighed. There she was, Margaret Fenwick, in a mint green suit, clipboard at the ready. He opened the door just a crack. "Good morning," Ethan, Margaret chirped with a tight-lipped smile. "I'm here for your mid-season interior ambiance inspection." Ethan blinked. "My what?" "It's a visual inspection, Ethan," she said as if explaining to a kindergartner. "We've had some concerns about the consistency of interior window treatments across the neighborhood, particularly from the exterior view." "Yours were flagged." "By who?" he asked, trying to keep his tone polite. "Anonymous source," she said quickly. "Doesn't matter. What matters is your curtains may be in violation of the spring palette. We need to evaluate." Ethan stepped fully into the doorway, now using his frame to block her view inside. "Margaret, I'm not aware of any such inspection schedule. And I don't believe the HOA bylaws allow entry into someone's home without consent or clear cause. This is cause," she insisted. "Lavender is a transitional winter-spring tone. You're 2 weeks into primrose season, Ethan. We're seeing yellows, whites, soft pinks. Not melancholy purple." Ethan had to fight the urge to laugh. "Respectfully, Margaret, no one's getting inside my house to analyze curtain vibes today." Her smile faded. "Are you refusing a formal HOA evaluation?" "I'm refusing to open my door for an unscheduled aesthetic shakedown," he said firmly. "If you have concerns, you can email me, or better yet, show me the section of the bylaws I'm violating." Her eyes narrowed. "You want to play this the hard way, Mr. Rowe. If the hard way means drinking my coffee in peace, then yes. Yes, I do." For a moment, there was only the sound of birds chirping. Then Margaret's hand dipped into her blazer pocket. She pulled out her phone with deliberate flair. "I'll be calling 911, she said flatly. "You're refusing cooperation. You're creating a hostile environment, and I fear for my safety." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're on my porch, which is visible from the public sidewalk," she snapped. "That makes it community-adjacent property. That is not how any of this works." She turned her back to him and began dialing. He didn't try to stop her. A slow smile crept across his face. Because if she wanted to escalate, oh, she was about to find out exactly what escalation looked like. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was who would pick up the phone. and once she did, it would be far too late to turn back. The curtain drama had just turned into a full-blown HOA showdown, and this time Margaret wouldn't be the one holding the clipboard. Margaret's thumb hovered dramatically over the screen as if she were launching a missile strike. Ethan remained at the door, arms crossed, still calm but alert now. This wasn't the first time Margaret had overstepped, but it was the first time she'd threatened law enforcement over drapes. He didn't say a word. He just watched and waited. The call connected. 911, what's your emergency? Margaret didn't hesitate. Yes, this is Margaret Fenwick, president of the Briar Blossom Lane HOA. I'm on site conducting an official inspection, and I'm being blocked and harassed by a resident who is acting erratically and possibly dangerous. He's refusing to comply, and I fear he may be armed or barricaded. Inside the house, Ethan sighed and whispered, "Oh boy." Margaret continued her performance, her voice rising in pitch for maximum urgency. He's exhibiting aggressive posture, is verbally obstructive, and is creating a threatening atmosphere. I'm very concerned. I need immediate police assistance. The pause that followed was short but pregnant. On the other end of the line, a calm professional voice responded. Understood, ma'am. Can you provide the address and describe your location relative to the suspect? Ethan couldn't hear Naomi's voice directly, but he knew her cadence. That measured, unfazed rhythm. He could picture her at her dispatch terminal, earbuds and coffee beside her, recognizing the address within seconds. Back on the porch, Margaret responded quickly. It's 78 Briar Blossom Lane. I'm standing on the walkway. He's inside the house, refusing entry for compliance inspection, and appears unstable. Ethan chuckled under his breath. Unstable, he mouthed. That's a new one. Margaret's voice dropped slightly, but with growing desperation. He could have anything in there. I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe at all. Naomi, playing her role to perfection, asked, Is he currently threatening you? Do you see any weapons? Has he made any statements of harm? Margaret fumbled. No statements directly, but his refusal, his tone extremely menacing. He wouldn't even let me finish my announcement. I'm telling you, it's an escalating situation. Back at the dispatch center, Naomi typed furiously, her screen now filling with highlighted flags. Possible barricaded subject. Potentially armed. Request for immediate response. She paused just long enough to take a slow sip of her now tepid coffee, then keyed her mic again. Copy that, ma'am. Officers are being notified. Please stay on the line. Help is on the way. Margaret lowered the phone with a self-satisfied expression, as if she'd just summoned a security force for the president. She glanced at Ethan triumphantly. They're coming, she said, almost smug. You've brought this on yourself. I'm sure I have, Ethan said. So while we wait, do you want a chair? It might be a while. Margaret scoffed and turned her back, pacing the walkway like a sentry. From inside, Ethan walked to the kitchen and topped off his coffee. His heart rate hadn't even spiked. If anything, he was curious how far she was willing to go. He knew Naomi was working the dispatch board today. He also knew her professionalism was airtight. She wouldn't do anything unethical. She'd simply follow the protocol and make sure every single word from Margaret's mouth was recorded, logged, and timestamped. The next 20 minutes were eerily quiet. Margaret remained outside, pacing, muttering into her phone, likely embellishing further details for any backup calls she thought might help her case. She was in full performance mode now, hands gesturing, head shaking, with theatrical dismay, occasionally casting suspicious glances toward Ethan's front windows. Inside, Ethan flipped open his sketchbook and began doodling. He imagined a comic panel, a pastel-clad tyrant shouting at tulips while helicopters swirled overhead. The stillness didn't last. The first sign was a distant wail of sirens. Then another, and another. Margaret perked up instantly. She stepped to the curb like a hero awaiting rescue. She smoothed her suit jacket, adjusted her HOA lanyard, and prepared her victory speech. Ethan leaned against the wall, raised one eyebrow, and whispered, Showtime. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers came screaming around the corner, tires screeching slightly on the flower-lined bend. They stopped hard at the curb, blocking access to the street. Officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters, eyes scanning the property. Margaret waved wildly. Over here, she cried, pointing toward Ethan's house like she just spotted an escaped fugitive. One of the officers moved toward her cautiously. Another flanked the driveway, peeking toward the home. Ethan calmly opened the door. He stepped out onto the porch with both hands visible, holding nothing but a steaming mug of coffee. "Good morning," he called out. "I'm Ethan Rowe. I live here. And I think there's been a very big misunderstanding." The officers paused. They looked at him, then back at Margaret. "We received a call about a resident possibly barricaded, potentially armed, refusing lawful entry," one officer said. Ethan tilted his head. "Barricaded, I've got curtains, lavender ones. And I said no to an unscheduled HOA ambiance inspection. That's all." The officer raised a brow. "You mind if we talk more?" "Not at all," Ethan said, stepping down from the porch, slowly still sipping his coffee. "You want to come in, see the threatening interior design for yourselves?" The offer hung in the air. Margaret, now slightly breathless, ran up behind them. He was aggressive. He blocked the door. He looked unstable. The younger officer looked between her and Ethan. "Ma'am, were there any threats, weapons?" "No, but his vibe," she stammered. "You don't understand. He defied the HOA. That's the first step toward chaos." The officers exchanged a long look. One pulled a small notepad from his vest and began writing. Inside the dispatch center, Naomi watched the unit's body cams in real time through the secure link. She smiled softly, hearing the live feed from Margaret's second call. Yes, she had redialed. Claimed the man had probably destroyed evidence, and smirked at her through the window. Naomi made sure to flag that too. Back on the sidewalk, Ethan remained calm. Margaret, on the other hand, was starting to unravel. Her cheeks flushed as more neighbors began peeking out from behind their doors. The spectacle was growing. No SWAT team, no battering rams. Just a quiet man with a sketchbook and a woman slowly realizing she might have pushed things too far. Ethan looked toward the sky, just in time to see it. A low hum, then a whirling sound. Overhead, a police helicopter swept into view, slowly circling the block. Margaret gasped in delight, as if the heavens themselves had validated her importance. Ethan just smiled. The curtain wearer was no longer private. Now the whole street would see who Margaret Fenwick really was. The rotor blades chopped through the morning sky with a heavy thrum, sending the tulips in Ethan's front yard swaying like dancers, caught in a sudden gust of authority. The helicopter made a slow, deliberate arc over Briar Blossom Lane, its searchlight sweeping briefly across rooftops, then pausing over Ethan's modest home, as if the living room itself might be hiding a fugitive. Margaret looked up at the sky, chest puffed out with self-satisfaction, her hands clutching the edges of her blazer like a superhero cape. "They're here," she whispered more to herself than anyone. "They take me seriously." Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply took another sip of his coffee. "Margaret," he said loud enough for the officers nearby to hear, "you're embarrassing yourself." Again, one of the officers, a sergeant with salt and pepper hair and a face carved by years of dealing with exactly this kind of nonsense, stepped forward and held up a hand. "Sir, I'd like to ask you a few more questions. Mind if I take a look inside just to confirm everyone's safe and there's nothing unusual going on?" Ethan nodded. "As long as she doesn't come with you." Margaret started to protest, but the sergeant cut her off with a firm look. "Ma'am, we'll handle this." Inside, Ethan walked the officers through his front entryway. The air smelled of cinnamon and paper, the scent of old books and slow mornings. His living room was cozy with watercolor paintings on the walls, stacks of children's book drafts on the coffee table, and of course, the lavender tulip curtains in question. One of the officers stopped. "So these are the curtains," Ethan smiled. "Dangerous, aren't they?" The officer gave a short chuckle. "I've seen worse. My grandma has curtains that look like the inside of a piñata." The walk-through lasted all of 90 seconds. No weapons, no barricades, no signs of distress. Just a man who liked flowers, peace, and clearly had no interest in HOA drama. Back outside, Margaret was still gesturing at the sky like she'd summoned Zeus himself. When the officers returned to the lawn, their expressions had shifted. No longer concerned. Now, exasperated. The sergeant approached Margaret. "Ma'am," he began, his voice calm but edged with steel. "There is no threat here. Mr. Rowe has been cooperative. There is no barricade, no weapons, and no cause for tactical deployment." Margaret blinked clearly, blindsided. but I told dispatch he was dangerous. You heard me. I felt threatened. He smirked, ma'am. Another officer said you claimed he was armed and potentially unstable. That required us to activate protocol, including tactical prep and aerial support. But I was scared. That's not a crime. The sergeant held up a small tablet. On it, a transcript of the 911 call glowed on screen. Highlighted sections included phrases like barricaded, unhinged, may need a SWAT team, and most dramatically requesting helicopter airlift due to emotional trauma. Margaret turned red. That was a figure of speech. The officer tilted his head. You asked for a medical airlift. That's not a metaphor, ma'am. Across the street, neighbors had gathered, silent, watchful. Mrs. Halverson from next door clutched a mug of tea. The Chen twins on their scooters had stopped mid-lap. Even Mr. Bennett, who usually wore noise-canceling headphones in the garden, had pulled them off to gawk. Ethan stood with his arms crossed, again relaxed. He glanced up at the helicopter, now making a slow descending curve away from the neighborhood, its job done. Looks like the air cavalry's heading home, he murmured. The sergeant sighed. Ma'am, do you understand the level of response you initiated today? Multiple patrol units, fire and rescue, EMT standby, and an air unit. All for curtain complaints. They're not just curtains, Margaret hissed. They're part of a pattern, a decay of order, a slippage in standards. That man, he has no respect for uniformity. The younger officer flipped a page on his clipboard. According to the HOA documents Mr. Rowe provided, there's no clause about interior window decor unless it violates structural integrity or displays offensive material. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, and the officer continued, there's certainly nothing about seasonal color mandates. That's not a thing. I am the president of this association, Margaret declared. It is my responsibility to maintain harmony. The sergeant didn't flinch. Ma'am, you abused emergency services. You filed a knowingly false report, and the costs of this response will be reviewed by city authorities. You may be liable for them, possibly even cited. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Ethan raised a hand. Can I suggest something? Maybe next time she wants to inspect someone's curtains, she tries knocking politely and saying please. Might save the taxpayers some fuel money. There were a few chuckles among the gathered neighbors. One of the Chen twins clapped once before their mother pulled them back inside. The sergeant turned to Ethan. Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Sorry for the disruption. No problem, Ethan said, raising his mug. Your guys were professional. It's not your fault someone got dramatic over tulips. Margaret was still frozen in place, her expression blank as if her brain was trying to reboot. As the officers packed up, the helicopter veered off toward the city skyline. Sirens faded into the distance, and the cul-de-sac for the first time that day fell quiet again. But the reckoning wasn't over. Inside the dispatch center, Naomi Rowe was finishing her shift. She filed the call under false report high resource use, flagged it for escalation, and logged Margaret's statements in full with timestamps, audio attachments, and policy review notes. Then she sat back and smiled. Not a malicious smile, just a calm, earned one. She hadn't bent a rule, hadn't done a single thing out of line. She'd simply let the system and Margaret's own mouth do the work, and by tomorrow morning the real consequences would begin to bloom. The next morning in Briar Blossom Lane began like most others, sunlight slanting over manicured hedges, sprinklers ticking rhythmically along the sidewalks, and the faint hum of leaf blowers in the distance. But something was different. There was a stillness hanging in the air, like the neighborhood was collectively holding its breath. Ethan opened his curtains, the same lavender tulip ones, and sipped his coffee with a little more satisfaction than usual. His front yard looked no different, but the neighbors across the street lingered just a bit longer with their gazes. A couple waved, one nodded, and one older gentleman gave a firm thumbs up without saying a word. Respect silent and pointed. Margaret Fenwick, however, had not been seen since the previous afternoon. Word travels fast in a suburban HOA community, especially when that word involves helicopters, sirens, and a pastel-suited president being publicly scolded by police officers in front of half the street. But what really set tongues wagging wasn't just the drama, it was the fallout. By 10:03 a.m., an official email from the Briar Blossom HOA board hit every resident's inbox subject emergency executive meeting, HOA conduct review body, dear residents. In light of yesterday's events, the board will convene a mandatory emergency meeting to discuss the actions and responsibilities of the HOA leadership. All residents are welcome to attend. Transparency is our priority. It was signed not by Margaret, but by Vice President Carla Mendez, who rarely spoke at meetings unless called upon. That alone told people all they needed to know. Ethan smirked. He forwarded the email to Naomi with the subject line, "The roses are blooming early this year." Later that evening, the community center buzzed with quiet energy. Folding chairs were set up in the main hall, and for the first time in recent memory, every single one was filled. Couples, retirees, young families all gathered, not for a summer potluck or garage sale planning session, but to witness what many were calling the curtain incident reckoning. Margaret sat stiffly at the head table, her posture rigid, her hands clasped over a binder. Her coral lipstick had been replaced by a shade of beige that matched her wilted demeanor. No pastel power suit today, just a gray blazer and a strained smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Carla cleared her throat and began. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We know yesterday's events caused concern and confusion. We want to address them directly and transparently." Several heads turned toward Margaret, who stared ahead without blinking. Carla continued, "As many of you know, our HOA is governed by a charter, bylaws, and a shared expectation of professionalism. Yesterday, those principles were not upheld." A murmur ran through the crowd. "We've reviewed the emergency response transcripts, the dispatch call logs, and the costs incurred," Carla said. "We've spoken with the city's emergency management office, and we've spoken with legal counsel." She took a breath. "The board has determined that the actions taken by President Margaret Fenwick were not only outside the scope of her authority, but also a violation of civil conduct expectations and an abuse of emergency services." Margaret's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. As of this evening, Carla said Margaret has been formally removed from her position as HOA president. Gasps. A few audible, "Thank God," one clap before someone else shushed it. Margaret finally stood. "I acted in the best interest of this community," she said, her voice shaking. "I was trying to maintain standards. We have rules for a reason. If we allow unregulated curtain choices, what's next? Inflatable lawn ornaments, neon signs, satellite dishes on every roof." A man from the back stood up, Mr. Halverson, known for his birdhouse collection and quiet demeanor. "We already have satellite dishes, Margaret," he said. "We just don't report each other to the police over them." Laughter broke out. The dam had cracked. Carla held up a hand. "We're not here to debate aesthetics. We're here to affirm a basic truth. This neighborhood is built on trust, not tyranny. And when that trust is violated, there are consequences." She turned to the table beside her. Another board member stood holding a folder. "The city has issued a citation for filing a false report and abusing emergency response protocols. The preliminary invoice for the services dispatched yesterday totals over $16,000. That includes multiple police units, EMS standby air support, and fire department deployment." More gasps. "We're working with the city attorney to determine if those costs can be personally charged to Ms. Fenwick," the board member said. "We are also filing an HOA ethics complaint, which may result in a permanent ban from board leadership roles." Margaret sat down slowly, visibly trembling now. Someone in the audience muttered, "Bet she wishes she liked those curtains now." Naomi, seated quietly near the back in a navy hoodie, and Jean said nothing. But she did smile, small, private, and entirely deserved. After the meeting ended, residents lingered. Many approached Ethan. Some offered hugs. Others shared stories of their own silent battles with Margaret's clipboard. One woman pulled him aside to whisper, "She once cited me for a hummingbird feeder, said it attracted chaos." He nodded. "Sounds like her." Naomi joined him near the snack table. "So, that went well." "I almost feel bad," Ethan said. "Almost." She nudged him. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," he said, then glanced out the window. The streetlights were coming on. The tulips were still blooming. "And neither did you," he added. She smiled wider, brushed her fingers across his sleeve. "All I did was answer the phone." Life on Briar Blossom Lane settled into a new rhythm after that, one noticeably lighter, quieter, and with a lot fewer pastel suits roaming the sidewalks, holding clipboards like weapons. The HOA didn't dissolve, community still needed structure, but the tone had changed. Gone was the air of control and quiet threat. In its place, neighborly nods, actual collaboration, and a surprising amount of floral freedom. Ethan noticed it first in the small things. Mrs. Klein, who used to peek nervously from her blinds anytime Margaret walked by, had installed a window box bursting with pink geraniums, unapproved, oversized, and proudly overflowing. The Chen twins tied a bright green wind spinner to their mailbox. Mr. Halverson painted his birdhouses blue and orange, and Ethan, well, he went shopping. Not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but because sometimes when you survive a public circus over curtains, you have to lean in. He ordered custom curtain rod finials shaped like blooming daisies, oversized, shiny, slightly ridiculous, and unapologetically non-compliant. When the package arrived, Naomi stood over his shoulder as he unwrapped them. "You're really going to put those up?" she asked, eyebrows raised. Ethan held one up to the light. "Absolutely. They're bold," she said. He grinned. So was she. "I think it's only fair." He installed them that afternoon. A statement not just to Margaret, who had vanished into a silent retirement from HOA politics, but to the entire street. That sometimes standing your ground doesn't have to be loud or angry. Sometimes it's lavender curtains. Sometimes it's daisy finials. Sometimes it's just not moving from your doorway, no matter how many rules someone invents on the spot. Naomi's dispatch logs from that day became something of a legend at the center. A few colleagues printed excerpts and pinned them to the bulletin board under the heading "Emergency" or "Emotional." One officer who had been on the scene even stopped by Ethan's home a week later, just to shake his hand and thank him for the most absurd call I've ever been on in 15 years. Neighbors still whispered about it. They'd call it the Great Curtain Crisis, the Lavender Standoff, the day the helicopter came. But for Ethan and Naomi, it was simpler. It was about boundaries, about not letting fear or faux authority push them around. One Saturday morning, about a month after it all blew over, Naomi stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside Ethan on the swing. "Do you think she'll ever show her face again?" Naomi asked. Ethan sipped. "Maybe, but I doubt she'll ever ask to see our window treatments again." Naomi leaned into him. "Probably for the best." The breeze caught the curtains gently through the open window, lavender tulip patterns glowing in the morning sun. Inside, the daisy finials gleamed like a row of quiet victories. And out front, the roses had started blooming a little wilder than usual, no longer trimmed to HOA standard height. Just growing, freely, as they should be. Word count, 1, 8. Wind down, 300 words. Sometimes in life, the people who scream the loudest about rules are the ones who fear losing control, not order. They weaponize guidelines to justify behavior that at its core is about domination, not unity. But here's the truth. No one has the right to violate your peace, your privacy, or your dignity in the name of community conformity, especially not over curtains. Ethan Rowe didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't escalate. He simply stood his ground. He said no. And when that no was challenged, when it was twisted into something dangerous, justice answered the phone. Calmly, quietly, legally. Naomi didn't bend the rules. She didn't need to. All she did was listen, log the truth, and let someone hang themselves with their own story. The lesson here: you don't always need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you just need to let the facts speak. And when someone insists on making a scene, give them the spotlight just long enough for the whole neighborhood to see who they really are. So if you've ever felt pressured, cornered, or belittled by someone misusing power under the guise of doing what's best, remember this story. You're not alone. And no, you're not crazy for wanting peace. Sometimes justice comes not in the form of shouting matches or courtrooms, but in the quiet click of a dispatch line and a cup of coffee on your front porch. Thanks for listening. And as always, stay kind, stay aware, and don't let anyone tell you your curtains are too bold.